This is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Thanks very much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of every single day. For your second listen today, make sure you check out Locked On Bets as your boy Q and Lee Sterling get you ready for all that. Plus, Locked On Now has the NBA recap of action last night on a big night of the NBA. That's available for you on your podcast at Locked On Now and on YouTube at Locked On NBA. So Joe Ingles, last year was his peak as a player. Really a remarkable year. As I said earlier, when you look back at us being at 52 and 50, he's the reason. An incredible kind of point guard, transition, three-point shooting, small forward. He was all over the place for us last year as he played in 67 of the 72 games for the team last year. He finally sat out of a game, ending his streak, shot 49% from the floor, 45% from three. He averaged 12 points. At 33 years old, Joe Ingles had a career year that spurred the Utah Jazz to the really, and I thought Joe was sixth man of the year. I've said this. I don't mean this as a slight to Jordan the same way if I said Jordan was the sixth man of the year. I don't mean it as a slight to Joe. I thought Joe was more efficient. I thought he was more vital. I thought he did more things. I really thought he was our sixth man of the year. He was an incredibly important for the last few years. He has been a wildly important third ball handler on the floor for the Utah Jazz. He ran 21% of our pick and rolls last year, which I believe was the second most on the roster behind Donovan Mitchell. He had that really neat combination with Derek Favors that we saw so many times, but the fact was that he actually was way better with Rudy Gobert. That was, as much as, that's not what we talked about, in the sense that we always talked about the Joe Ingles, Derek Favors combination, and it was great. He was part of key lineups last year. Joe Ingles last year and Rudy Gobert were as good as anyone in the NBA. Frankly, only Donovan and Rudy and Mike and Rudy were much better. Otherwise, Joe and Rudy were in the top group. He ran 22% of our pick and rolls. And so you've had this incredible piece of our puzzle, 6'8", 220, able to play the pick and roll, see over defenses, make plays that other guys can't make at that size, and then also an electric shooter. I don't have the numbers anymore, but for a long time, in the first 6 seconds of the shot clock, he was the number one effective field goal percentage player in the league. You've heard me kind of say a lot of times, like, get out, like he used to come back for the ball, and I understood how great he was in transition and wanted him to get the ball out a lot more than that. And he really was, he was as much of a key cog of anything. And we've been sitting around, I think, waiting a little bit, wondering whether or not Joe Ingles was going to return to form, because this has been a real struggle for him this year. Whether it was the COVID or the body just failing him at 34 years old, or just the amount of basketball he's played in the last 3 years with Australia, for whatever reason, this had really become a little bit of a struggle. The month of January for Joe was the 30% three-point shooting, I think, and 20% from three. And honestly, the weirdest thing to me about this injury, and I'll share this, is when we went to break on the segment before, I turned to Ron Boone. I said, Joe looks as far off as I've ever seen him. And and then it looked to me like Joe came out in the next part of the game and really tried to assert himself. He made a beautiful pass on the play before, on a drive and a kick out. And then on the next play was the hard drive to the basket. It was as though he knew he was off and he was trying to assert himself on the game. I think a bunch of the comments that came out of the locker room about, we all know how much this matters to Joe and how much he cares, was really telling. And this guy was our bellwether. Like, if you go look at wins this year and losses, in wins, he shot 44% and 40% from three. In losses, he shot 35% and 26% from three. Like, if Joe went, we went, still to this day. And then you look at January in its final 11 games of this season, if he, in fact, he's done for the season, 29% field goal percentage, 20% from three. I mean, this has just been 7 of them starts. The signature to Joe has always been that when he starts, he's going to be better, and it gets the ball in his hands and he plays the ball more. And he didn't have the ball in his hands nearly as much this year. And he just really was not playing as well. That evolution of player, and it hit a wall this month. And frankly, it hit a wall a few other times in Joe's career. Frank, you go back and look on the summer before or the first half of the season, in with the autism going on, if I remember correctly, that's February of 2020, and he shoots 35% and 29% from three, and then it kind of then he goes to the bubble and he seems rejuvenated, unless I'm off by a year there. I'm trying to remember when that was. If I might be off by a year, but I don't think so. That's kind of I think I have that right. And so we've seen these little bumps for Joe before where he bumped out of it. January, it might have been January of 2019. He did it as well. He shot 39% and 31% from three, and then came out of it. This has always been kind of a tough stretch time of the year for him. And so what do we do? So that's Joe the player. I think we've talked about the career run. Joe the player, length, point guard play, early offense, dynamite shooter, third ball handling playmaker that could play point guard or be the second ball handler on the floor. The bellwether for the Utah Jazz. When he's on, it was the added piece that just made us unstoppable. And I think we've saw that, and then we saw this month that the struggle, like it wasn't the same Joe. So what do the Jazz have to do? How do the Jazz survive this without Joe Ingles? So the first one, in just the simplest form, is something we've all talked about an awful lot in this show, is the concept of 240 minutes. And whenever I look at a roster, I always ask myself, does this team have 240 minutes? We don't right now. We just lost 25 minutes of Joe Ingles on a team that doesn't have a great deal of depth. In fact, if you follow Dan Clayton on Twitter, he's been doing a really interesting piece where if you look at our main guys play, we're really good. The minute we add one other piece to the puzzle, we're not. We now have 25 minutes of having to add one more piece to the puzzle. The best player on our roster that is not playing a great deal is Eric Paschall. The problem to me is I was beginning to see signs and spent a bunch of time on it yesterday on how Eric Paschall at the 5 actually might work. Despite being 6'6" and not a great rebounder, we were actually rebounding fine. There were beginning to be some lineups that showed that if you had other ball handlers and shooters and on the floor with Eric Paschall, namely Joe, that actually the small lineup would work, because suddenly you had Bojan at 6'8" and Joe and Eric Paschall at 6'6" and maybe Rudy Gay or Joe. I mean, you just had a bunch of guys that were actually all big enough to get it done. And the length that we lose from Joe Ingles here is vital. He's, as much as Joe has been off his game and not looked quite right, and I really feel like the last few games are as far off as I've ever seen him. You still at 6'8", there's a lot of defensive metrics that showed that he was far better than what we thought we were seeing. And it all stems back to the length. So we lose that. And we just, honestly don't have 240 minutes. And we lose some of our best lineups on the floor. Some of the very best lineups that we have as a team involve Joe Ingles. The bridge lineup, as we called it, the one that bridged the first and second quarter, the one that bridged the third to the fourth quarter. Jordan Clarkson, Joe Ingles, Mike Conley, Rudy Gobert, and either Eric Paschall or Rudy Gay, it had been equally successful so far this year, was the key to why we won games. That Joe Ingles in that lineup, we were plus 18.4 with Rudy Gay. That same lineup with Eric Paschall's plus 22.2. So in 700 possessions this year, that group's about a plus 20. With the 2 6 Men of the Year award winners, in my mind, Mike Conley and Rudy Gobert, 2 All-Stars. It didn't matter if it was Eric Paschall or Rudy Gobert. It was actually a little bit better with Eric Paschall. That's a key lineup to us that now we can say, like, well, the next best player for the Utah Jazz to play and to help Joe out is Rudy Gay or Eric Paschall, but Rudy Gay's on the floor there. So now suddenly you're playing Eric Paschall and Rudy Gay together. I'm not sure that's really the answer. Another one of our key lineups was Donovan with Royce, Bojan, and Joe, and Rudy had played a little bit, was plus 13. Some of our Joe and Hassan lineups were not quite as good. But as we look at our rotations, it's going to be a real effort to fill that. And I don't know who the player is to me that fills it. The Eric Paschall is the best player that isn't playing, but Eddie House or Elijah Hughes probably fits kind of to our rotation, but neither of them have that skill set of ball handling and things that nature. Now, on the other end, if Joe didn't break out of his January slumber, we were probably going to have to do, something anyway on that. The biggest one to me, frankly, is that Rudy Gay has to step forward in some capacity on this. We'll talk about that some more in just a second. Today's show is brought to you by Built Bar. Built Bar, the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. Built Bar with the coconut brownie chunk is my favorite. The churro puffs are back, and I got to admit, surprisingly good. I haven't made my coconut marshmallow order yet, but I will have to very, very shortly because I'm kind of enamored with the whole puffs. Plus, you have all the regular flavors: mint brownie, raspberry, coconut, salted caramel, peanut butter brownie, cherry barcia, cookies and cream. Caramel almond delight is one of the favorites of my partner, Carl. Calories 130, fat grams 2.5, carbs 4, sugar 4, no nuts on some of them. Some have nuts. I'm a big fan of the no nuts because I'm allergic, so I try not to die. And 17 grams of protein. Truly, it is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. It's amazing. It's Built Bar, 100% real chocolate, 100% delicious. Promo code LOCKED15 gets you 15% welcome bonus. That's a 15% welcome bonus not a welcome bonus, 15% bonus at all times. You can do it at any order for a Built Bar. So the player to me that has to step up here is Rudy Gay. And we're relying now on another 35-year-old to suddenly get going. Rudy Gay right now is at a career low field goal percentage, 41%. He's shooting 35% from three. And he also has had kind of a miserable January here for the Utah Jazz. In the month of January, Rudy Gay is shooting 37% from the field, 30% from three. He's shooting actually 29% from three since the end of November in the first 7 games of the year. And to me, this is the guy who it now falls on. And he probably has struggled not getting enough minutes and being, a big enough part of the rotation and the roster. And now is an opportunity. In the last 26 games, he's shooting 38% from the field, 29% from three. He's averaging 8 points. He's 5 rebounds. But to me, he's going to have to play with the ball in his hands, I don't know if he can play the pick and roll. He's going to have to play defensively like they asked him to. To me, the answer on this roster as it sits right now is and has to be Rudy Gay for the player that steps up to try to help the Jazz through this sequence. And you start to look at the rotations, and it's not, it's been a long time since we actually had a rotation. I was trying to find today, what game can I find for Jazz fans to look at and decide, let's look at our rotation and how it would work. I actually went back to try to find one that I thought would work. And I went back to a November game against New Orleans just randomly. And then even on that one, we were short Royce O'Neal. So I kind of laughed at the fact that the way this season has gone, trying to find games in which you look at our rotation to figure out, what it is and how we can actually get the right guys on the floor and playing. So if you look at it, Joe used to come in right at the 6:19 mark, and Rudy Gay would come in at the 3:58 mark. I think you're going to have to bring Rudy Gay in with Hassan Whiteside now, Mike Conley and Rudy Gobert sitting down at that point. And then Rudy Gay probably has to now play, if he's capable of it, that Joe Ingles extended stretch. Joe used to play. Those 25 minutes came in 2 12, 13-minute stints. And what you're now going to try to cover is Rudy Gay's minutes, which will likely be with Eric Paschall. And that's where Paschall now plays Gay's minutes, which are the 4 minutes to close the first and the 4 minutes to lead the second. But your lineups are now just so different. It's just, instead of a 40% three-point shooter, you have Eric Paschall on the floor. Instead of another ball handler, it's Rudy Gay. It's really, really a difficult sequence for the Jazz. We'll talk a little bit more about the locker room, the trade value, and how the franchise moves forward, continuing on our Joe Ingles edition of Locked On Jazz today.